I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today with a fun experiment that came from one of your comments on a video where I discovered a new variable when it comes to dyeing yarn. Now, in my 2024 Hanukkah series, I did some shoebox dyeing, which is essentially me setting up yarn in a shoebox, pouring on dye, and then moving the yarn to let the colors blend together. But what I realized, and that I hadn't considered, is that the end of the yarn where the zip tie is located makes a difference in the final colorway. With these progressions that we had here, we either ended up with something more orange or more green, depending on if the zip tie was at the yellow end of the yarn or the blue end. But what the question asked me was, well, what happens if you have a zip tie on both ends and pick it up from both ends and put it back down? And so I kind of think we need to try that out and try all three variables. So we'll have 3 shoe boxes today. One with a zip tie on the yarn near the yellow end where we add that color. One with a zip tie near the blue end. And then one with zip ties on either end. So when I pick up the yarn, it'll be more hammock style as I lift it. We'll see what happens. And well, I'm excited to see the results. Now, this image may have given a tiny hint as to our color palette for today, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. Our yarn today is Knit Picks Swish DK yarn. This yarn is 100% superwash merino wool, and I pre-soaked it in plain tap water with no acid overnight. With this shoebox technique we're doing, I like to add acid right before we move the yarn to give the colors a little bit of a chance to spread out. And I have 6 skeins, 600 grams pre-soaking in here, and they already either have 1 or 2 zip ties on them already. I'll just have to move these before I put this in our shoebox. As for our dye colors, you probably got a sense looking at my little sketch, but we're gonna use Dharma Acid Dyes Brilliant Yellow, Caribbean Blue, and Deep Magenta. These are 3 primary colors. They should blend in a fun way and give us some kind of muted rainbow. I don't know quite about the proportions yet. I think it depends on just how much of the Deep Magenta dye I have, but we're gonna add the same amount of dye to each of our setups. Speaking of setups, let's bring on the shoeboxes. The stock solutions I had were 1% stock solutions, which meant that originally I had 1 gram of dye dissolved in 100 milliliters of liquid. Now I say originally because these stocks are slightly older, and so sometimes things settle, and my confidence in the concentration goes down when I hit the end of a bottle. So for more consistent results, I like to mix my dye stocks fresh. However, since I'm adding the same amount of these stocks to each of the cups, I know I'm adding the same amount of dye, even if maybe it's a little more or a little less than I originally thought, because I shook the bottles up well. But anyway, I measured out 20 milliliters or approximately 0.2 grams of dye of each of the 3 colors into various containers, and then I diluted it a little further with 100 milliliters of just plain tap water, no acid, to make the pouring slightly easier onto our yarn. In my 3 shoe boxes, I added 8 cups of water, again with no acid, and to each container, I'm going to add 200 grams of our pre-soaked yarn and just sort of scrunch it down. Now, another variable I have not really talked about today is that the way things are scrunched in here could make a difference with the way the colors spread, but I have achieved decent consistency with this kind of technique in the past. Okay, I'm gonna add the colors in the same order in each of the shoe boxes. But over here, I am adding the zip ties at the bottom. And then for our final shoe box, the middle, I started off by adding 2 zip ties to each skein. But what I'm gonna do is kind of move it so then I have the skein in half with zip ties at one end, or at each end. This is going to be interesting when I try to do this one, but we're going to give it a try and see where we end up. And I'll pull those back up in a second. Okay. The goal is to have things reasonably well distributed. And now we're gonna pour on our dyes. So let's do our yellows first. We'll do our yellows over here. I probably should have used less volume. It's all fine. I'm gonna move my zip ties in to do this. Sometimes when you set things up, you realize, oh, there's this change maybe I should have made. Other times, you may not, but it's all good. It's all fine. Okay, we'll do the pinks in the middle last. Let's do the blue. Sorry, yellow. Maybe I should have added only 50 milliliters, but we're fine. I am trying, as I pour back and forth, to add this at the edge. Just because that way it means I'm pouring consistently. Oh man. I am gonna let things sit for a while, but depending on how much yarn is at the surface, you can see the dyes are moving. We're getting some greens even now. And that is just totally okay. We're just not gonna move the yarn yet. Now for our pink, adding it to the middle. Now the reason why I like lifting up and moving the yarn, which may be not as dramatic because of this huge volume that I have the dyes in. I'm already having some regrets, Rebecca. But the dye doesn't go all the way to the bottom because there's some resist. So by lifting and lowering the yarn, we're going to be moving the color through more. And even if we see blending on the top, there may not be blending in the middle or on the bottom quite yet. But what I'm gonna do now is just be patient and wait. And we're gonna wait, let's wait 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll come back and move the yarn. It's been 20 minutes, and I know this one looks like we've got some more green right there, but I'm gonna pop up an image from my phone to show you that the edge of them is all very yellow. It's just this one bit on the top that looks green. We're now gonna add acid, lift, and put the yarn back in. But we're gonna do that all at once. So I'm gonna add 3 tablespoons of white vinegar, adding 1 to approximately each part. I'm lifting the yarn, this one from the yellow end, adding it back in, and sort of giving it a nice little wiggle in place. Okay, that was from the yellow end. And we've got a nice sort of like dirty green at this end down here. Okay, for our one that has the zip ties at the blue end, I'm adding the acid in approximately the same order, but this time you'll see the wrong side of it as I lift up. The yarn looks very similar as I pick it up, and then I'm going to put it back down, add it in, and give it like a nice little shimmy just to get the color through. And you can see things that are similar to what I've shown before, even though the colors are slightly different. And this one, even though this top edge looked like it was going to be green before, we've got more orange up here versus more green. Okay, now we're going to lift up from both ends at the same time. I kind of regret the way I have this set up a little bit, but let's try. We're going to do blue, yellow, pink. That's 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. Gonna lift from both. Let things drain a little bit. Add the yarn back in this awkward-y kind of way. And see, and it is more similar. Well, it's similar to both, honestly. This is really interesting. This is actually extremely interesting. So, from lifting from both, I see a combination of the two. And what is making me really perplexed right now is we have, it's not quite the same, but we have like a golden yellow here, just like when we lifted from the blue end. And then over here, this one is more teal down there. This one is more just blue, same here. So, what conclusions can we draw here? Because I think what I might have predicted is I might have predicted that lifting from the yellow end would look similar to lifting from the other yellow end. But that's not the case. It is the unzip tie end that we preserve when we lift from both. And I'll have to think about that. Maybe we'll talk about that towards our conclusions, but this is really, really cool. We could come up with some other ways to lift this yarn up. You might ask, well, what happens if you have the zip ties in the middle on the pink section instead of the ends? My caveat there is that if I were to pick up the yarn from the middle, the yellow and blue ends would then come together and touch. And so in that touching moment, because acid was added recently, we would get color transfer for sure. This is something that I've seen when I did the Hanukkah glazing video. If I let the ends touch in the dye bath, then we got transfer, which is fine in some cases, but doesn't really give us the same kind of information. And so you can always come up with other tweaks and variables and things to try out, and I highly recommend that you go ahead and test it. But for now, we're just gonna stick to the 3 setups that I have, and then who knows, we can see where we wanna go in the future. Now looking at the yarn, you have to wonder if we picked it up from the middle and let it drain, would we get a yarn that would have like this end and this end? Like, is that what we would see? I don't know. I don't know. I know lifting from the middle would be hard, but oh man, I really don't know. But anyway, now we need to set these aside to let things set. I'm doing this cold process because it allowed me to set up 3 things side by side. And so I'm gonna let them sit at room temperature overnight or maybe for a couple of days, so then I can go ahead and steam set the yarn, and I'll go ahead and put lids on them. But I am going to let everything sit for at least 15 minutes before I move it, just so that way me moving the yarn doesn't cause a lot of like mixing from where we are right here. It's 2 days later, and I don't know if I have these in the same order that I did last time, but things do still look similar to where they did before. The zip ties at both ends looks a lot like the bottom of the zip ties at the yellow end and the bottom of the zip ties at the blue end. And so now we're gonna go ahead and steam set things. And I mean, that water is very, very clear. There may be a hint of color. I'm less worried about there being color transfer from the yarn touching itself than I might otherwise be because the water is now clear. But I'm gonna go ahead and steam this for 30 minutes. And I'm gonna need to do this a little bit in batches just because I don't think I can fit, maybe I could fit 6 skeins in the steamer basket at once. I guess I'll try. No, 4 skeins is really the limit for my steamer basket. So I'm gonna go ahead and steam set these 2 right now for 30 minutes. I mean, the water is really cold because my kitchen is cold. So maybe I'll do 40 minutes because it gives it time to heat up, but you can see that this water is also clear. So we'll see you in about 40 minutes over by the steamer basket. It's a good thing I had come back over because when I came over to just say why I'm bothering to steam set the yarn, realized the steamer basket was off. And so now I've turned the heat back on. I mean, things were hot because I just steam set some different yarn, but anyway, the reason why I still steam set the yarn, even though the water is clear, is just because there are some pigments that do need heat to really fully bind to the yarn. And I've had cases where the color might be clear in the dye bath, but then when I go and wash it, things bleed. So I figured just to have more confidence in that the colors are well set, I'm gonna steam set yarn that I cold process. But again, the cold process allows me to set up 3 different batches side by side on camera. It allows me to process more because ultimately putting things in and out of the steamer basket is faster than a lot of other dyeing things on the stove. And so it lets me assembly line things more. But anyway, I'll see you when the timer goes off. Okay, the timer went off. Now, the reason again why I extended the time to 40 minutes from 30 minutes was mainly just to make sure everything could get hot, because with the yarn more compact in here, there was a chance that with the yarn more compact in here, there was a chance that the middle could stay cold longer. So that's just why we did it. And now I can bring over our last yarn. And this time I'm only gonna steam it for 30 minutes because we have less yarn here in the container. The yarn was kept over by the window, and so with the water in there being cold to touch, that's another thing that helps me think about how long I might want to steam. If the yarn were outside and it were warm to touch and it didn't feel cold when I touched it, then, you know, I would be okay with 30 minutes with it being more crowded. But when you have to change the temperature more, then you can just have a little more time. Not a problem. Let's wash all 6 skeins at once, and I'm even leaving the extra, oh, I don't need to wear gloves right now. I have gloves on because I was working on another project. Which maybe you can hear in the background. But anyway, I'm leaving the double set of zip ties on the yarn that I lifted from both ends, just because that's going to be the easiest way for me to tell them all apart. Let's add some soap in with this rinse. I'm just adding a little bit of some dish soap. And then I'm going to fill all of this up with water. You know, one other variable that I didn't consider when I did this project is sometimes different yarn bases behave differently. So swish could behave differently from stroll, but that's also, the fact that the yarns could behave a little differently is a little bit mitigated by the fact that I set up all 3 batches with the same yarn base for these comparisons. But we have no color bleeding, which is fantastic. So I'm gonna rinse the soap out from this out of focus yarn. And then I'm gonna put it through my spin dryer to remove the liquid, hang it up to dry, and we'll come and take a closer look at all of our colors. This project is pure gold. And I really, really need to thank whoever asked me to lift the yarn from both ends, because I think that when I was first doing this, before I realized that the end you pick the yarn up from makes a difference, I never would have thought about doing that or thought that that could be a variable that could change things. But these results are so cool and a little counterintuitive. All right, so here we have the zip ties on the yellow end, zip ties on both ends, and then the zip ties on the blue end. And I think that the color that is at the bottom when you lift it up is the one that ends up more, quote, true. Like, we have blending on everything, but with the zip ties at the blue end, we've got a golden yellow. With the zip ties at the yellow end, we have a more pure blue. And so, and having those 2 colors like reflected when we pick up from both, because here we have an obvious teal, here we have an obvious green, and those colors are pretty absent in the other examples. Now, one other thing that it could be worth redoing this using a pink that does not strike fast, because I believe that deep magenta is a pink that will strike and bind to yarn faster than either Caribbean blue or brilliant yellow. Both of those colors are bigger spreaders. So I think that if I were to pull, say, fluorescent fuchsia instead, I wonder how that might change the way things end up. Not that I want to set this up in exactly the same way to redo this experiment, unless, well, that's something that you really want to see. You want me to redo this, but swapping out the pink for one that spreads. Let me know down in the comments. Now, those remaining colors aren't identical. Like there's some difference in the blues between the two on the left, probably some differences in the gold on the two on the far right, but I think that these yarns could work together in a project in a pretty fun way, because like the transition and the colors that shift or don't shift, that's just really interesting to me. And so I think you could do, you could definitely fade them together and it would be very interesting. But I don't know exactly how it would look. Certainly I would recommend alternating skeins every couple of rounds, just because that would help the transition and the blends, especially if, say, these golds are a little bit different. But I think that they would work really fun together as a very subtle set. And here are those 3 skeins all twisted up. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I had so much fun with this project. Of course, now I'm wondering, ooh, what if I put the blue in the middle and it had the yellow and the pink on the ends? Oh, you could have so much fun cycling the colors in the middle, like have the yellow in the middle. Oh man, I'm wanting to do more of this. I really hope you're not sick of this, because editing Rebecca is writing down all these thoughts and I just want to play. I enjoy this technique and I enjoy playing with the combination of primary colors. And if you enjoy this too, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. And also, if you love the yarn that I dye, it's all in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. Every listing has the title and approximate publication date of the video, so you can go back and watch the video where I dyed the yarn. And I think that gives an extra special bonus to the journey that these yarns will go on. Oh, and each yarn label also has the video and approximate date on it, so you don't have to go back and find the listing to get that information. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see what I would create with this technique next.